Warning: the following documentary contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
Broken Morals, the CIA's descent into torture.
After World War II, the world was trying to move past the horrors of the war, including state-sponsored torture. As the truth about the suffering of thousands, both prisoners of war and civilians came to light, outrage spread. The United States, known for promoting human rights, helped push for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was meant to be a promise that no one would be subjected to cruel and inhumane treatment again. This declaration influenced many treaties, including the Geneva Conventions in 1949, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the UN Convention Against Torture, showing America's supposed commitment to justice. But commitment is only as strong as the actions taken to uphold it. Rights, when unprotected, become nothing more than words.
Not long after, in 1961, the U.S. officially entered the Vietnam War, which had began as a political struggle between North and South Vietnam, which then blew out into a full-scale war in 1954. The U.S., fearing the spread of communism, backed South Vietnam. To fight the military giant known as the U.S., the North Vietnamese employed one key weapon in their arsenal: torture. As Jonathan Mahler, a New York Times journalist, wrote in 2005, the North Vietnamese knew they were overmatched militarily, but they figured they could at least win the propaganda war by brutalizing American prisoners of war until they denounced their government and falsely confessed that they had bombed schoolchildren and villagers.
This brutal treatment of American prisoners of war had a lasting impact on U.S. soldiers' morale. In response, the military brought back the SEER program, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Originally created during World War II, this program trained soldiers to escape enemy capture. In the Vietnam War, it was expanded to include training to withstand torture and counteract the spreading of false propaganda. But over time, it was twisted into something darker. Soon, instead of protecting soldiers from torture, the US government became the ones using it.
But why would a country that had once fought against torture suddenly embrace it? The answer lies in a single event that changed the world: the bombing of the World Trade Centers on September 11, 2001. Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, launched a series of attacks that nearly killed 3,000 Americans. Their goal? To create a single Islamic state by taking down powerful world orders, specifically those perceived as dominated by the Western world. However, the CIA was soon blamed for not being able to gather and act on its intelligence to prevent this horrible attack, causing them to become desperate to prevent another tragedy. But in that desperation, the CIA, with approval from the highest reaches of the US government, turned to torture. In its fear and rage, the US abandoned its responsibility to uphold human rights, setting the stage for one of the most controversial intelligence programs in history.
Torture, a horrific way of obtaining information, is a technique outlawed in most prominent nations due to its ineffectiveness and questions of morality. But after the tragic terrorist attacks on 9/11, 2001, the Bush administration pushed the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, to gain actionable intelligence through any means necessary, which led the agency into launching the Enhanced Interrogation Program. This program used violent torture techniques that clearly violated Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 7 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, both of which stated that no one shall be subjected to torture, harsh treatment, or punishment. Through this program, the United States failed to uphold their responsibility to enforce their international laws and regulations, they disregarded moral responsibility as a self-proclaimed model nation, and they violated the fundamental rights belonging to the prisoners tortured, scarring them and the world.
In order to gather intelligence and fuel the land invasion into Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda, later known as the War on Terror, the Bush administration passed several classified directives enabling the CIA to use torture on supposed perpetrators of 9/11. To do this, the CIA and US military started hunting down the alleged members and affiliates of Al-Qaeda. The CIA then took these detainees to secret prison sites known as black sites. These sites were hidden in countries like Lithuania, Poland, Thailand, and Afghanistan. They allowed the CIA's horrific actions to remain in pure secrecy and allowed it to implement torture, disguised as the Enhanced Interrogation Program. One of the key architects of this program was James Elmer Mitchell, a psychologist contracted by the CIA who had previously worked in the SEER program. Michael and his colleague, John Bruce Jessen, took the resistance tactics from the SEER program and reverse engineered them into a method of interrogation. They designed the system based on learned helplessness. believing that breaking the detainees' will would make them more likely to reveal useful intelligence. Instead, it created immense suffering and unreliable confessions. Moazzam Beg, a public speaker and ex-CIA detainee, showed just how destabilizing these methods were in a 2017 interview with HBO Vice News.
Degraded us in ways it's really hard to, even now, hard to describe. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to remove our sense of individualism, remove our sense of humanity, and give us each a number. And we'll remember our numbers to this day. We'll use it.
Prisoners were subjected to torture such as waterboarding, where detainees were forced through simulated drowning, walling, where prisoners were slammed into walls, stress positions, where detainees were forced into painful bindings, sleep deprivation, and more. The suffering was so extreme that some detainees tried and succeeded in taking their own lives. The CIA justified these actions by arguing that they were necessary to prevent future attacks, but in doing so, they shattered the rights they had once vowed to protect. The contrast was glaring. The United States, a nation that had long positioned itself as a beacon of freedom, justice, and human rights, had become a perpetrator of the very abuses it once condemned.
Soon, through the work of dedicated reporters, the Enhanced Interrogation Program was exposed. The public reveal of torture taking place within the confines of these black sites sparked international outrage. Countries that allowed the CIA to operate within their borders faced intense backlash from their own people and the global community. What was once a closely guarded secret was now a major scandal, exposing the role these nations played in human rights violations.
Furthermore, the nation that had once condemned torture now stood accused of gross hypocrisy. They'd put their anger to avenge 9/11 over their responsibilities to international treaties. The US failed to protect the rights of not only the prisoners they captured, but the citizens hindered by the war on terror.
After these revelations, legal and policy changes were inevitable. The Detainee Treatment Act of 2005 was a major step. Passed with overwhelming support, it banned the cruel and inhumane treatment of detainees, reaffirmed the US's commitment to the Geneva Conventions, and aimed to prevent future abuses. This also led to the Executive Order 13491, passed by the Obama administration, banning all forms of torture and formally disbanding the Enhanced Interrogation Program.
Many proponents of the Enhanced Interrogation Program believe this extreme measure was vital in procuring intelligence on 9/11 and the subsequent war on terror. According to the creator, James Mitchell, the temporary discomfort of a terrorist who has voluntarily taken up arms to destroy our way of life does not outweigh my moral obligation to do what I can to save hundreds, maybe thousands of people.
However, this belief was flawed. The Senate Intelligence Committee report revealed the truth. These techniques weren't just cruel, they didn't work. The report stated, while being subjected to the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques and afterwards, multiple CIA detainees fabricated information, resulting in faulty intelligence on critical intelligence issues. The UN Convention Against Torture of 1984, UNCAT, made it clear there were no exceptions. War, terrorism, or instability could never justify torture. The US had not only broken international law, but it also betrayed its own values.
Through the use of the Enhanced Interrogation Program, the U.S. violated the basic rights of detainees. These individuals were denied a fair trial, held without charge, and subjected to inhumane treatment. At the same time, the U.S. failed its responsibility to uphold the treaties and conventions it had once championed. On top of all that, it set the bar to many countries around the world who viewed the U.S. as a model nation and the quote-unquote leader of the free world that torture was perfectly fine and acceptable.
The Enhanced Interrogation Program marked a dark chapter in U.S. history. It violated human rights, damaged the country's moral standing, and ultimately failed to produce reliable intelligence. The fallout, false leads, diplomatic strain, and lasting harm to America's reputation serves as a stark warning. Upholding human rights and following international law must always be a priority for nations, even in difficult times. Enhanced interrogation techniques ruined lives and exposed the U.S.'s failure to practice what it preached.